Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kerry-Jean and I wanted to show you something today that I actually started work on about a year ago. I have a background of fashion design and textile design. I stepped away from the fashion industry for a multitude of reasons, which I won't go into here, but over the years, I've made little bits and pieces for myself. I've made little bits and pieces for friends and that sort of thing, but I haven't really delved into textiles or fashion design in almost 20 years now. So about a year ago, Jenny Mountford from The Rabbit Hole in Bridgetown opened up a brief for a end of the year exhibition for 2019, which was called Wearable Blooms. And that was the brief. You could make flowers out of anything, but the one thing was it had to be a wearable garment that had flowers on, or however you wanted to interpret that. And I sort of went, oh, this might be a bit of fun. And so it was around about April last year that I began the project. The beginning of the project was sort of figuring out how I wanted to go about doing it and what I ended up wanting to make. And that just took me on a whole tangent down the river. It was actually really, really enjoyable. This video will show you how I went about constructing it. A few things about the actual project. I made a conscious effort to not purchase anything new for the actual project. So everything was hauled out of my stash that I had redeveloped since moving to Bridgetown, Western Australia. And also I ended up deciding to hand sew the entire garment. And with that in mind, I looked at what I had and I decided to make a kimono as basic as I could. So nothing too massively traditional, nothing too overly complicated, but the aim was to hand sew the entire garment and to not buy anything new for the actual garment. So what I ended up coming up with was this. So I'm going to hand you off to the voiceover in a sec, and you're actually going to see a lot of the construction that I worked on. So hand stitching all the seams, hand stitching everything within the garment, and then creating the flowers, and you'll see that entire process, and you'll see a full shot of the full kimono at the end. The one thing the whole process brought back into alignment for me was working with textiles. Since doing this project, I have now just gone on these long tangents of just hand sewing, and I found the movement of slow stitch as well, which is really just scrapbooking with fabric really at the end of the day, and sewing it together however you want. It doesn't have a purpose really, but for me, I've always loved textiles and fabrics. So for me, it's that tactility, that touch aspect. So it's been a wonderful journey, and I had an absolute wonderful time doing the project. And what was even more enjoyable was the fact that because I'm studying through a university, I'm studying psychology, and I convert a lot of my textbooks to audio because I'm dyslexic. I would be able to sit and listen to my textbook work while I hand sew, and it was a wonderful experience. It just calmed everything down, and also it helped with days that I was in a lot of pain. I have now been diagnosed with fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis, along with a few other things. But I'm not allowing those things to stop me. I've actually found a entirely new world of creativity that I'm able to actually do, even with the medical issues that I am currently being treated for. And so I'm going to pass you over to the voiceover. You can see how I went about making a lot of this, and you can see the final project at the end. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend the actual showcase night due to the fact that I was not well and could not go out. I was, however, invited to put my piece up in the gallery exhibition at the Rabbit Hole Studios, which was a lovely gesture by Jenny. And I had a ball. So have a look at how I've made it, and I hope you enjoy. So I began my project with a fabric sketch, what I call a fabric sketch, on a 1/3 size mannequin, just to see how things will look and sit together. From there, I ended up working out my pattern and my sizing for the kimono and cut everything out, which is quite boring to watch. And here I am starting to sew the actual kimono together. As mentioned before, I decided to do the entire thing as hand sewn, and because it's a lot of straight lines, it wasn't too in depth into what I was actually doing. And I ended up using a standard back stitch to sew the entire garment together, because this was going to be the strongest type of sewing that I could actually work with. The fabric I'm using is some really cheap polyester something or other. It wasn't really suitable for a kimono, but because I wanted to just use whatever was in my stash and not buy anything new for this project, I really wanted to delve into the recycle aspect and the use what I have aspect for this project. I basically made out whatever I could find relevant in my sewing stash. The one thing with hand sewing that I've learned is your threads will knot, and you need to become very calm about sewing, and sometimes you have to just, clip things and start again, or, just find a way to actually work with what you've got. These days I tend to just stop and sit there with the needle and actually unravel a actual knot, just to make sure that it's going to pull through on the fabric properly and everything like that. I have recently been educating myself on the physics of sewing, and I found out a lot of amazing things, which I'll go into a little bit later. Here's a really close-up of what I'm sewing, and you can see they're tiny little stitches. And I became very fast, not really fast, but very adept at doing this sewing, because it was all straight lines, it's all quite monotonous. But I would find that after a couple hours I'd sewn like 2 or 3 full-length seams, and when I mean full length, I mean probably 1.5 meters worth of seams. So if 3 or 4 of those in an hour or two is quite good. And I'm not going very fast, as you can see here. I'm sort of going about snail pace and just finding a steady pace and enjoying what I'm doing. During the process, what I found helpful is changing up what I was sewing. So within a kimono, there are a number of different parts to the actual garment. There is the kimono, which is basically all straight lines, and then you have the neckline. But there's also something called the obi, which is the almost corseted bit that goes over the body. Remembering that I wasn't holding to a very traditional sense of a kimono, I was really doing and inspired by Japanese kimono clothing. This that I'm sewing at the moment is the obi, and I had this lovely maroon, rich red maroon fabric that I ended up using to make the obi. After working on the obi, I ended up working on the outer kimono, which was made out of tulle. Here I am attaching the collar to the actual shell of the garment. I found that doing a backstitch on the solid fabrics like the red in this image worked really well, but when I got to doing the actual tulle, I found doing the backstitch quite difficult. So the tulle is sewn predominantly with a just a standard running stitch. Here you can see the entire kimono underpiece, the cream piece. This is when I actually finished it with the obi attached. And then this is where I started sewing the tulle together, and it was quite a task because tulle isn't a very nice fabric to actually hand sew, I will say that straight away. But I ended up managing, and it ended up being okay, but it was quite difficult. I sew in a very Oriental and Japanese method, much like sashiko stitching, where I actually thread the fabric onto the needle. I'm also ambidextrous, so every now and again you'll see me, sewing with my left hand, just to confuse the issues. And in these videos you see me actually working with compression gloves on because I actually suffer from rheumatoid arthritis. My hands get very sore, and I believe I sewed this during much of winter in a house that wasn't very weather sealed, and it would get really, really cold inside. So I would wear the gloves and sit in a tiny little room that was my craft room at the time, and sew with the heater on next to me to try and keep me a bit warm. And now we go on to my blooms. I decided to make handmade flowers out of book paper. The books I use are usually old books that have been damaged in some way and they're not viable as a reading source anymore. They might have lost pages or something like that. So I would punch the book pages out, and then with a round small file I would roll the petals, as you can see here. This was a technique I was taught many years ago by a fellow paper crafter, and I was taught how to make my own flowers instead of buying flowers. I managed to get hold of a flower punch, paper punch. I would roll petals on 2 pieces and then glue one set of petals of flower over the other as an offset, and that's how I did my paper flowers. They came out really gorgeous, and I keep getting asked how many did I actually make, and to be quite honest, I have no idea how many I made. I can get into a flow very easily doing this sort of work, and I just kept making and making and making. I do believe I still have some punched flower shapes sitting around left over from this actual project. And yeah, this is me working on flowers while I'm listening to my uni lectures that are playing on my tablet that's sitting in front of me. And I would just sit and roll petals for hours on end. I would also do it sitting in front of the TV while we watch things. It's basically just sit there and take from the pile, roll the petals, and put it down. Here's a bit more of a close-up of how quick I can work. And I wouldn't try and be like super fast with this. I would actually just try and find a good flow, good momentum that I could maintain. Because sometimes if you go really fast at things, you'll find that you actually, your quality starts declining, because, or you start tearing. I always knew I was going too fast was when I started tearing petals off, because I was gripping it too quickly and too much. And the cat on my lap is Delta. She loves to help. So once I actually completed making all the flowers and all the garments, it was time to glue the actual flowers down. I'm just using a hot glue gun, and underneath the tulle that you see that I'm gluing the petals onto, or the flowers onto, is actually wax-proof paper, because I found that if I didn't put some sort of wax-proof paper underneath the tulle, everything would actually adhere to the top of my desk. So the wax paper was very important. So I started at the hem, and I started quite heavy at the hem, or at the base of the tulle garment. And I ended up covering the entire tulle kimono with these flowers. But as I went up into the body, it got less dense. So here is a work in progress video clip of the actual garment. So far it's looking really, really great. And here you can see the final project in its glory at the gallery after I'd set it up. You can see small little butterflies that have been created in acetate that I've added to it. I hope you've enjoyed this project, and I hope you come back to see some more as I continue this year.